Thanks for staying with us through the break. I'm Tom Williams. You're listening to Access Utah. We turn now to politics and social media. And at that intersection is a new website. It's called PoliticIt.com. It's created by a couple of USU students and a USU professor. And the goal is, what they're saying they can do is track all social media buzz around each of the presidential candidates. So we're interested to learn about this. We'll ask them perhaps who won the recent debates. I assume this site can tell us that. We're joined by USU professor John Johnson. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
We're also joined by Josh Light.
Thank you.
And Sterling Morris.
Thanks, Tom.
So how did this come about? I would imagine that you gentlemen are interested in politics. That's why you got into this field. And is this a reaction to polling? Is this a kind of sort of a competitor to polling?
Well, it came about really. We're working on another project. There's actually more people on the team than that. We have Shay McDonald, Lauren Johnson. They're graphic design primarily. They're MIS undergraduate students, and Brittany Johnson, who just graduated. And we were sitting around having lunch, and we decided, we were all interested in politics. We have different political views, but we decided to pursue this project, and that's how it really came about. The website does primarily three things. One, it predicts political polls before they come out. Two, it tracks data on how people feel about politicians over time. And three, it's a one-stop shop for people to stay up to date about the presidential candidates in this race.
So where do you get your data? Is that from the social media?
Oh, the data comes from social networks like Facebook and Twitter, but it also comes from real-life data, too. Money that people give into the political campaigns, stuff like that. So it's really measuring the heartbeat of how people feel about politicians right now.
Now, are you really able to predict poll results before the polls come out?
Well, what we use is a sophisticated prediction software called neural networks, and it uses genetic algorithms. And what it does is it basically takes all this data and it predicts what is going to happen. And when we ran the neural network on November 6th, for instance, November 6th, Herman Cain was predicted to be winning in the polls. But he had all these sexual harassment allegations out, and those were not those were not being accounted for in these polls at the time. But when we ran our neural network, it showed that Herman Cain was behind Mitt Romney and that Newt Gingrich was coming up in the polls. And if you look at the USA Today poll on Real Clear Politics, the polling numbers were very close to what we predicted at that time. And it's interesting because, imagine if we lived in a world where, football games never could happen live. We always had to watch football games 2 weeks after they happened. Imagine how angry football fans would be. Or if Harry Potter fans had to sit outside the movie theater 2 weeks after the Harry Potter movie was released. They were camping out there. Our world would be a lot different.
Certainly would be a lot different. Yeah, I'm trying to imagine that. There's one instance where you were ahead of the polls. It could track it faster. Does this do you counteract any potential skewing? For example, I could, just conventional wisdom, imagine this would skew younger because I imagine larger percentage of the younger population would use social media.
Well, actually, 42% of Americans are on Facebook, and only 10% of those individuals cannot vote. So a lot of people are in social networks. But one thing to consider here is we're not measuring just social networks. We're measuring things in real life. We measure in trade. We measure what people use Google for, what they say in Google, how they trend. So it's not just social networks. We're trying to gather a lot of different variables in both the real world and the virtual world. So our prediction capacity is much, much better.
On that same note, the younger generations are not watching TV as much as other generations, so it allows us to have a wider scope of measurement.
I was looking at some of the results. You're looking at the various Republican candidates, and I think this is based on the last debates. And I think Mitt Romney came out ahead on PoliticIt.com.
One interesting thing about mainstream media, when they go and the debates are over, they present their opinion on who won, and they might bring on some political commentary individuals that will present their opinion. But what we do is we go and we look at Twitter and we look at differences between positive and negative tweets that occurred in Twitter, and then we use that as one measurement, and then we use InTrade, which is a place where you can bet on the probability with real money of someone winning the election, and then we look at trading during InTrade during the debate, and we can actually see, like for instance, Rick Perry, when he had his big oops moment, his InTrade price dropped dramatically in the debate. And also a lot of negative Twitter activity happened. And then we use those two variables, and that's how we determine who won the debate. In our last debate, Mitt Romney was the winner. He was, if you took both those variables, he was about tied with Rick Perry in the last debate.
I noticed there was what stood out to me was the Newt Gingrich scores. Looked on the social media, looked quite high, but his InTrade score was lower.
You know, like one thing that's interesting about InTrade is it's a lot like the stock market, where you have people that will sometimes, speculate. And if you look at Newt Gingrich's data in our blog for the last debate, it really fluctuated up and down. So maybe the reason he had a decline was because individuals were betting up his price right before the debate because they knew he was going to decline. So it's not always completely accurate, but there's always a little bit of speculation. But I would say in general that it's pretty good.
Where does this fit into the substance, do you think? Part of this is really fun to look at the ups and downs, and in fact with this technology, not in weeks but in minutes, you can look at it go up and down. Where does this fit in? Where will this be useful in terms of electing the president that people want?
Well, I think that's a great question. If you look at baseball, for instance, and you look at before the year 2000, how did scouts in baseball go out and pick who would actually play in the major leagues? They would send out scouts, and the scouts would go out and they would look at people, and they would say, this ball player, he has a really attractive girlfriend, so he has confidence. He's going to make a great Major League Baseball player. He walks nice. He's going to make a great Major League Baseball player. And this is depicted in the movie Moneyball. And you look, and these scouts would take these individuals to the general manager, who would actually decide who played on the team. And it was interesting because the general manager for the Oakland A's, and I think it was around 2000, 2002. He basically brought an economist on, and the economist said, hey, let's pick people based upon statistics. Let's pick people based upon how many times they get on base. And they used that data, and even though they were one of the lowest budget teams in the entire league, they did exceptionally well that season. So what they did is they used data to make their decisions. And you can draw the same thing with politics today. We have mainstream media who goes out and they look at candidates and they have their own personal biases, or they use their own data to pick who they want to bring to the general managers, which is us. We're the ones that vote. We pick who plays on the field. We pick who represents us in the world scheme. And sometimes some of their personal biases might be whether the color tie they use in a debate, or the suit, or how nice they talk. But, the real situation here is we're not picking a Hollywood actor. We're picking the commander-in-chief of the free world, who has to represent us with a lot of complex issues. So one of the things that we do is we help people make those complex decisions by presenting them with objective data. We try to push through the clutter. One of the things we like to say is, if you want to know what the media is saying, Google it. If you want to know what the people are thinking, PoliticIt. So we kind of help people see what the people are thinking as opposed to what other people say that they should think.
If you just joined us, we're talking with some of the creators of PoliticIt. That's the site that we're talking about, PoliticIt.com. They track all the social media buzz around the presidential candidates, and they say they're able to predict poll results a week or two before the poll results are out. We're talking with USU Professor John Johnson and with USU students Josh Light and Sterling Morris. And we have another 6 minutes or so here in the program. I noticed on the website you're very careful to say that you're not biased. You equal weight to all viewpoints. I guess that's reflected in all the team. The team all has different viewpoints.
Yes, one of our mission is to provide objective data, and an interesting part about our team is we're made up of individuals, all of whom have our own individual political interests and candidates we're polling for. But as a team on the website, our main mission is to provide objective data and not support any one candidate. And we feel by doing this, people can trust the data, know that it's accurate, and that there isn't any agenda behind it.
Hmm. And I guess a lot of focus on Republicans this time around because that's the open race, and we assume President Obama on the other side will be the nominee. But I guess if it was 2008, it'd be even more buzz surrounding this because you'd have both sides with this. That brings me to something that's being studied now. I've seen some case studies on President Obama's, then candidate Obama's, use of social media. In that case, to gain support, to raise money. It is gaining in popularity now. I would imagine every candidate has maybe a social media director.
Yeah, interesting about that. You can see which candidates are really effective at social media and which aren't, because we have statistics on that on our website. Obama is definitely leading a lot of them, but it's kind of an expected with the social media because it's kind of expected because he's been in office a long time. But I mean, Newt Gingrich has quite a bit of Twitter followers, and we actually track that. And it's interesting because when you see a politician's going into decline, you can see things like their Facebook followers declining and their Twitter starting to even out. Like Michelle Bachmann, she's experienced quite a decline in our data. You can see her in-trade price dropping. You can see a clear decline in her Facebook followers. So I think that the data tells very interesting stories.
So in that case, the social media indicators are following the general indicators. Do you think, looking at some of these sites, that a candidate can counteract that by trying to have a good presence on social media?
I think that that could be a big part. I think as the voting, there's quite a few people on social networks right now that are voting. There's quite a large percentage, it's not representative of the whole population, but I think that in the future it's going to become even more important for politicians to target these individuals like they do with other forms of advertising. Mm-hmm. So being able to look at data on a website and being able to look at the social media data and be able to capitalize on that for a politician is going to become really, really important. It already is important right now, but it's going to become even more important in the future.
Hmm.
It was interesting before. If you look at Wikipedia, it's kind of a leading indicator of what's going on. Herman Cain, before he really took off in the polls, it was interesting to watch the real spikes in his Wikipedia hits. And, if you think about that, who goes to Wikipedia? It's people that don't know much about a candidate, right? And so all of a sudden you saw this massive hit on Wikipedia, and you saw people going there to look up Herman Cain. And he really led for a long time in that until the recent decline.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about tracking the hits on Wikipedia because I guess it's, in my mind, obscured by the whole debate on the content about on Wikipedia. But that's interesting. So if you just have a couple of minutes looking out, this is sort of day to day and week to week. Anybody want to hazard a guess on the eventual nominee?
InTrade is currently predicting, I think, something around 70.8% chance of Mitt Romney being the nominee at this point. But there's other nominees that are growing. I think Newt Gingrich was growing. I haven't looked at the InTrade data recently. I think he was like 8%, and then Ron Paul's like 4-5% generally, and then Huntsman and the other ones are considerably lower in percentages. InTrade's are pretty good at predicting these things, I would say, because people have their real money on the line, so they're not going to bet, if they don't really believe someone's going to be a candidate.
There seems to be a real anti-Mitt crowd. And they've shifted around from Rick Perry to Herman Cain, and now Newt Gingrich is actually picking up a lot of those. So, no telling that Huntsman in the future may actually pick up a lot of that, sentiment as well. There's still a long ways to go in the election, so it's, at this stage it's pretty hard to tell.
Yeah, just about a minute and a half. What are your ambitions? Where would you like to see PoliticIt.com go?
Well, right now we're focusing on the presidential candidates, but eventually we want to focus on congressmen, and then eventually we want to focus on local elections. We want people to be able to go onto PoliticIt and elect city council members, see articles coming about them, seeing what people are saying in social media. Eventually we want to take this to other countries. Imagine how this would impact somewhere in Africa where people could check out a politician and actually elect people, based upon what they're saying. And places where there's propaganda, you can get through some of that with a website like this. So we want to take it to the world. We want to go all the way with this.
Oh, interesting. We've been talking with some of the creators of PoliticIt.com. That's politic and then add IT. PoliticIt.com, and that's up and running. You can go and see it. Got it up right here. And tracking some of the information. This is day to day, and they're claiming that they can predict poll results before the polls come out. It tracks the social media buzz around each of the presidential candidates. We've been talking with Josh Light and Sterling Morris, USU students. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
And USU Professor John Johnson.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for listening to Access Utah.